we're going to be breaking down Polyamorous. This is a track off of Otherworld, the new album, and it's a banger. I'm going to be breaking it down track by track and going into all the plugins and the sound design and stuff. It's going to be a longer video, but it's going to be informational. And I know a lot of people want to grade this style of music, so let's get right down to it. We're going to start with the most simplest thing, which is the bass. Bass is literally just 808. Very simple bass line for the intro, but the actual bass line is right here. And I think it has another version, which is right here. So yeah, now the sound design for it is really simple. It is, you see there's two layers here. Some of them come in, some of them don't. I'm going to start with the main layer that you're actually hearing, 808XD. It is a plugin with a bunch of 808s in it. I don't use this too often because I have a lot of 808 samples, but this is pretty good. It's kind of a free alternative to that one plugin that producer made with a bunch of 808s. I can't remember the name of it right now. Bishu uses it a lot. We have some gain added. It's 3.5 dBs. You can also look at percentage, but I prefer the dBs. I feel like that's more helpful information. There's also this EQ, boosting some low end, keeping the mids kind of the same, and cutting out the high end. It's a bass instrument, so we don't really need any high end frequencies. There is organ too. Usually that would have a lot more high end frequencies, and for some reason there's volume automation, I guess. Must have accidentally added that in there when working on this a long time ago. This is an element you can't really hear that well in the entire mix. It's supposed to add some mid-range to the bass. I think it achieves that. It's not super noticeable though. The actual organ 2 sounds like this. Yeah, we're not making deep house bass lines with this. It's just following the 808. And yeah, it's the M1 house split, which is the organ 2 preset layered with the M1 house piano. The organ 2 is on the lower frequency or lower notes of the piano, and the actual house piano is on the higher notes. And then we just have some EQ on it. So yeah, and together that sounds like this. Very simple. Now, that was probably the most simplistic part of the entire track. Everything else is, it's not really difficult, it's just a lot. So let's start with the drums. This is the drum parent for, I'm going to say, the first drop. I don't really like thinking in drops and buildups. It's just, yeah, but this is like the first like big part. The parent track. So or folder, whatever, drum folder. Basically, it's this compressor, slow attack to keep the transients, even though the attack time is really fast on effect compressor, and fast release to get rid of like the tail end of sounds with 8:1 ratio. It's a higher ratio than 4. In any case, this is a very colorful compressor. It changes the tone a little bit, which is why I like it. And we're getting about like not much gain reduction at all though. We have Fat Filter Saturn, which is a multi-band saturation, but I'm using one entire band with the warm tube drive. It's just adding a little bit more to the drums. We have some EQ. The EQ is really simple. We're just cutting sub-frequencies out, boosting 100 hertz on it so that the higher part of the kick can kind of come through. And we have the low mids, like 3 to 500 hertz. It's a little dip around there because that's a bad frequency, in my opinion, for this. That can be covered by the pads and some other melodic stuff. And we have around 7K to like 10K area boosted a little bit because that's where like the snap of the snare and the hi-hats kind of lie on the breaks. So yeah, we have all that. The first thing we're going to talk about is the low end break. So it's just breaks that have more kick and snare than hi-hat to them. You see the kick and snare is a little bit more noticeable. I did pitch it up just a little bit. I just did that just because you don't have to do this, but it kind of changes the tonality of the break. So we got some multi-band compression on it, and then EQ. Very similar to the other one, but yeah, it's a little bit more broad. So we have that. Then we have the top loops and like other like high-end drums. If we look at the folder for it, we have some re-EQ, which is cutting out the low end, and we're boosting some higher mids and some of the high end. We have a guitar amp plugin on it. So it is a clean amp with the bright knob on. Does it sound clean because it's not a guitar that's going through this? It's, well, an entire drum sample. And there's not even any distortion or anything like that on here. It's just going straight to the amp. It's got the rectifier cabinet that the Gojira plugin comes with. I chose that because I feel like that was a little bit better for this than the other 5150 cabinet. I don't really know what the difference between that cabinet is and the other one for the high gain 5150 channel. There's no EQ, like, at all. And the mic placement is like this. It's right up against the grill. And position is not... It's like closer to where like the outer edge of the inner cone is. You probably don't know a lot about mic placement because it's not something most producers really care about. It's more of a recording engineer's thing. I am not very skilled with the mic placement. And in fact, I'm pretty sure this is just the default for this. So yeah. And there's no reverb and delay on it. That would create a lot of mess that I wouldn't like. Also, the noise gate is completely off. And we have the last EQ looking like this, just cutting out low end and boosting some high end. Add a little bit more crispy sound to it. The top drums have this one track here. I didn't name it. Like, I usually didn't even rename most of these, if you'll notice. But it's just where the drum fills are. We have one right there, and we have one right here. So yeah, it's just a bunch of drum fills and some effects here and there. We have the first layer of the like high-end drums. It's an aim and break here. And then we have a think break over here. You can see it's more breaks that have a lot of high end, but you don't need them to have that. It's just good if they have that characteristic already. But to be fair, we are high passing a lot and boosting a lot of the higher frequencies. And that's more of the top loop sound. We have an actual top loop though underneath that. And this one stays consistent throughout the entire song, wherever it's at. Sounds like this. There you can actually hear the guitar amp distortion, which is being automated throughout, by the way, here and there, which I recommend doing if you're making this kind of music. It adds a lot of characteristics adds a lot of character. That's what I'm looking for. It adds a lot of character to the drums you wouldn't otherwise be able to achieve. Next, we have the drum room. It's just a reverb send for the drums, so you can kind of hear. Drums really aren't that difficult to like learn how to make for this type of music. It's just a lot of layering, and as we go on with this, you'll learn that for this type of music, layering is one of the most important aspects in producing this style. and it can be an art form sometimes. Sometimes layering is really easy, and other times it's a pain. So we move on to the effects track. It's just reverb and delay that's being automated. At least usually that's what you're most likely going to hear. But you see we have some fade ins and fade outs on some of them, and yeah. So the effects are usually samples of some sort. So like this one's from Chainsaw Man. You might recognize that if you're a Chainsaw Man fan, but it's just Power being kind of like surprised by Denji's reaction to her reward offer to Denji when talking about her cat that was kidnapped by that one devil. But we also have a rewind sample. And we have the infamous Breaking Bad sample. This one's like probably my favorite part of the song, to be honest.
Why don't you just fucking die already?
So yeah. Now to actually make things sound like this, we have a couple things going on here. We have anything like this EQ is just cutting out a lot of low end and cutting out some of the high end, but we want more mid range going on. We have OTT. You can tell I played with the depth a little bit in the the downward percent. This is more like fine tuning the OTT compressor to be less like out there. Like it's not supposed to be as it's going to be more tame compared to how other people might use OTT. I just kind of did that to add a little bit more crisp to it. A little bit. It adds a little bit more like it almost sounds like a distortion, but it's not quite how that works. We have some delay. You can see it's at 0%, but that's because it's being automated throughout. See if I click right here on this part, you can see that the mix went up. So we have that. There's reverb, which is a convolution reverb. I just have the Sweet Verbo preset on. I didn't have any reverb IRs at the time. And I also don't really use reverb anymore since I got Convolver, I believe it's called, the Melodic audio convolution reverb. And we cut the low end like this and boost a little bit of the high end. Not high end, the mid range. We also did boost some high end though, but not by too much. So yeah, that's how you get that sound. You could go even further with this using like tape cassette or like vinyl, like you can make it sound more lo-fi if you wanted. I didn't want that for this because the entire it already sounded the way I wanted it to. No sense in fixing what ain't broke. We have the synth here. It says synth. I mean, there's a lot of synths in this song, but this one, it's a trance polysynth. It's the Tarnt's preset in Surge. You see it says Surge XT. That's just the newest, or it's not even the newest, but it's a newer version of Surge. But this preset was in both versions, the old and new. But yeah, it's a polysynth, and I took the delay and reverb off because I used my own settings on Valhalla delay, which is a ducking delay right now. It's the BB duck, so it's bucket brigade ducking. Essentially, I only have the ducking at 35% because I didn't want the ducking effect to be too noticeable, but I did want it there. And I did use the dual setting, not the ping pong, because I wanted a dotted quarter on the right and a normal quarter on the left. Just add some rhythmic variety. We have Valhalla Shimmer, probably my favorite Valhalla DSP plugin, easily. It's just so ethereal sounding. S tier plugin. Yeah, Pancake. Cable Guys makes really good plugins. I'm pretty sure you can emulate this in Shaperbox, which is another plugin they have, and it's great. This is so much more convenient than automating panning by hand. This does it for you. So this also goes across 2 bars, so you can change how long the LFO is, but this was perfect. And the EQ looks something like this. We're kind of getting rid of some of the mid range, but the high mids, like the 5K hertz, is a little bit louder, and we're dipping. We're kind of reducing the 100 hertz range because it's not bass, and so we get this result. Crazy sound. It is usually I find trance leads and stuff to be kind of cheesy, unless they're used right. shout out Purity Filter. But oh my gosh, dude, when I added this, thanks to Kaidiak from NDSL server, also shout out to that guy. Um, this changed this entire part, and you'll hear it once we listen back to the entire thing. So yeah, it's it sounds really good with how I processed it, I think. And my processing for sounds is really simple because I usually try to start with sounds that are just good by themselves. We have this acid track. It's supposed to be a 303. It's another surge preset, and it's just a sequence in there. I didn't get I didn't get a 303 plugin until a little bit later during the making of this album. I think the plugin is called 303 Deluxe, and it's so good. But this, I think I changed some of the steps in the sequence down here. It's the Acid Buzz preset. I don't know if this is in the older version of Surge, so you might have to update it. But you can see it's Vincent Zauhar. I butchering that last name, but yeah, it's in sequences. It's Acid Buzz. I got rid of any effects that were here. I usually always do that because I like using my own effects. I use this filter because I like the drive on it a little bit more, and also it's just like so much easier to define the parameter to automate instead of going through a long list. Or Reaper users know what I'm talking about. But yeah, I'm automating the resonance and the actual like cutoff knob throughout this. We have Archetype Gojira again. This plugin is used a lot, I think, for my music. I love Neuro DSP plugins. I use this and Archetype Tim Henson a lot. I also use Archetype Abasi, but I haven't done that as much anymore. It has less features, but it's still really good. And I have the delay and reverb turned off. Theoretically, I could have just left them on, or I could have turned them on and used those. I wouldn't use Valhalla delay. And yeah, I have dotted eighth notes, not dotted eighth notes, ping pong eighth notes. Low end filter, get the low end out of here, and lower mix than usual. This just adds more space, stereo width, and it's more mid heavy. This acids sequence just fills up the mid range. Now we have actual melodic elements. I mean, the synth, I guess, was an actual melodic element. The acid synth as well, but that's more rhythmic, in my opinion. I don't know, but yeah. So this is like the main melody motif in the song. You hear it multiple times. And yeah, it's super easy to get the sound actually. I use similar sounds all the time in my music. So if you look here, this is a grand piano preset on M1. You can use any piano or anything like that has a lot of harmonics on it. That's the idea, is you want something harmonically rich, so piano, guitar, some like sine wave synth, maybe even. Anything like that will work. It's just pianos are more organic, and I like adding organic elements to my music that would otherwise be only synthesized stuff. We have Valhalla delay as well. It's ping pong quarter notes, but you're not really going to notice the ping pong because of the fact that it's going through a reverb, a really long reverb. Supermassive is one of the best free reverbs right now. I would say it's probably essential for anyone starting in music production, and I still use it today. You can use it as a delay and or a reverb. And you can also use it for modulation. It's pretty versatile. I used it here because I like how just massive you can get with it. But I also distorted the signal after the delay and reverb. That's what makes that screechy-ish sound. It's kind of an idea that I took from post-rock or shoegaze bands. You have re-EQ as well, cutting out some low end, but there's not really a lot of low end to begin with, so I didn't really go that far with the high pass filter. And we boost the high mids and a little bit of high end to make it a little bit more clear, because the low mid frequencies get muddy, and that's It's not good. We don't want mud. We have the cowbell as well. It's pretty similar. 808 cowbell. It's in the sampler, and we pitch shift or whatever. We use the we make it detect the pitch so we can tune it because we're gonna be playing notes with it. We use Bass Professor. Anything to add grit will work. You can use an overdrive pedal, emulation, or anything like that. But I use Bass Professor here because I felt like I didn't use this plugin enough, and I still don't. It's good if you like bass guitars and in your music, you can use this with it. But it's more versatile than it's marketed, I think. After that, we use reverb, shimmer reverb specifically. Like I said, S tier plugin. We use Vol delay. This is a quarter note stereo tape delay. We filtered it, and then we distorted that again, but distortion's not too crazy. It's just saturation. And then we got this type of EQ. So we end up with this as the results for both of them. And the melody is super simple, but it works because of the drums, which we'll get into later when I start talking about the melodic elements of the music, but we're just talking about like the sounds themselves right now. So the pad is the last melodic element, and it's actually multiple pads. That's kind of the secret sauce for this style of music. I don't really think it's secret anymore. A lot of people have already covered this style of music, and they've all talked about how the pads or multiple layers feel like Julian Earl kind of like I'm not going to say exposed that secret because it wasn't really well kept to begin with. Layering is a very conventional technique in music production, but that's where I started to realize that like my pads could be better. And it's because of his tutorial, so shout out Julian Earl. The first pad is an M1 pad. It's a high pass pad. There's no processing on it whatsoever, and that's this sounds the more high-end stuff. Actually, I'm going to go to a part where the filter isn't being automated. See, it's very like hissy, and it's a lot of high-end information there, which is good because we have this. The main pad you're going to hear in the track. We're actually going to stay in this segment right here. It's another M1 pad. If you haven't figured it out, the secret to sounding like Pagliacci is using Korg M1. This is Synth Voices, or Syn Voices, preset in the vocal airly category on the combination mode. It's 2 layers, technically, which is why I like using M1, because it already has layers built in with the combination mode. Makes this so much easier. Then we have the background pad. This is a Labs preset. If we go into Spitfire Labs, you can see we have this textural pad Foen sound. I believe that's what it's called. There's no velocity curve. It's just at max, and I think I might have the reverb pretty high. And like, it's pretty simple sounding. If I turn the chorus and reverb off, you can hear it right here. It's very cinematic. Now the chorus is Azurite. It's a free chorus plugin. It's actually really good. Yeah, there's a lot of parameters in it, so you can really change how your chorus sounds. And the cool thing about chorus and a lot of other modulation effects like that, you know, flanger included and stuff, is they can mimic each other because they're all based on LFOs. So like, you can use chorus to create a flanging effect or a vibrato, or you can use flanger to create a phasing effect, you know, things like that. Some people actually prefer using flanger as a chorus, but here I just have it as a stereo chorus or spread voiced. I wanted more of the movement. I would usually use the ensemble preset in here for stereo width, but like I said, I wanted more movement with it. So it's a triangle wave, if you see here. So yeah, Valhalla Shimmer, really powerful plugin. The settings are a little bit more absurd here. for the actual reverb because I wanted the actual shimmer effect, but I put the mix down a lot lower because the reverb mode's on big stereo and it can be overwhelming. The thing about shimmer reverb that I feel like a lot of people don't understand is the reverb can add gain to the sound. Instead of washing the sound out and making it quieter, the reverb becomes louder because it's a pitch shifted reverb, and it can become overbearing. And you usually kind of don't want it to be overbearing. You still want it to be pleasant to hear. So yeah, all three of the layers together sound like, well, before I actually show you how they all sound like together, let me show you how I process them. We have this EQ, which the low split is automated. So if I go here to the beginning, you can see it moves throughout just to cut bass out. When the pads are playing without bass being played, then would have all the low end from the pad. But when the bass is being played, we cut the low end out. It makes the pads sound a lot bigger for those parts and things like that, and it fills in a lot of frequency ranges. Although I feel like looking back on this might have been kind of counterproductive, and you'll see why when we get there. This is Valhalla Freak Echo. I kind of wanted to shift the frequency to the delayed signal, just to have a unique character to the delay, and it's a quarter note delay. So yeah, it's just a frequency shifted delay. I wouldn't go too crazy on the frequency shifter because if you do, they can sound out of tune, and that's not good. We have Valhalla Supermassive again, big reverb. That's basically all it was, just a huge reverb, and I think there is some modulation happening, but yeah, it's mostly the reverb sound that we wanted. And then we have all the low end cut out of the pad, so I'm pretty sure this doesn't matter. Now that I did this, looking back at it, but it's too late now. The song's already out. And then we have this just to automate the filter cutoff. If you see here, you can kind of see it throughout. So now we can actually talk about the melodic content, or harmonic content in this case, because we're at the pads. So it's really simple. I wanted to kind of imitate some of the older jungle records in terms of like how certain things were played. So we have one chord that we made. We took whatever scale we're in. I don't even remember at this point. Stacked a bunch of notes from that scale together and made a huge chord. And then we copy pasted it and moved it down to where to like an interval that made sense. So like the root note here is E. We move the second chord down to where the root note is B. I believe that's a perfect fourth interval. You can correct me if I'm wrong. So yeah, it's just two chords that kind of do that. It may not make sense from a music theory perspective in terms of like the it might be like not staying within the key, switching between these two, but it sounds good, and that's all that matters. And it's pretty similar with this background pad. You can kind of see what I mean here. It's got like F sharp and A, and we have like B and E. The other part about this too is some of the instruments will play each other's parts instead. So if you look here, this background pad now plays the huge chords, and pad 2 will play this like dyad pattern, the 2-note chords. So yeah, that's the thing about making this kind of music is you sort of are writing your own samples using the MIDI and just copying and pasting them. There's certain spots and then changing where they're played and changing certain parameters with automation. The next thing we're going to talk about, since it's right up here, is the piano and cowbell MIDI. They're pretty much the same. They may be an octave apart, but the notes are the same. We can talk about this part real quick. It's just used as a percussive effect. But yeah, let's talk about the actual notes, right? So the notes, I believe there's only 4 notes. Yeah. So when writing melodies in this style of music, you don't want them to be like known for like a string of notes in a sequence or anything like that. It's like they're usually pretty spaced out, and there's not many notes at all. And the sustain of the notes is carried with the reverb and delay instead of actually like sustaining them. So yeah, if you look, it's also the pattern. There's like the notes just have to breathe. There's just space between the notes so they breathe. It's still, the listener can still grasp onto it, but it's because there's not much going on melodically. It's a lot more ambient, and the reverb and delay complement that. So, oh, and the distortion, that's just there to add character to the sound or texture. But yeah, it's the MIDI for the melodies isn't too crazy. It might be rhythmically weird at points. Like if we go back, you can see it ends on that 16th note, which is kind of weird, but it leads perfectly into the loop again. So yeah, it's really simple stuff, to be honest. The acid sequence is literally just a sequence, so I'm just copying wherever the bass is doing. So yeah, you could write your own inside of the MIDI piano roll with a better 303 plugin if you wanted. But all you need to know is for this is just catchy rhythmic acid sequence. So yeah, now the synth, the polysynth is kind of cool. It takes the two notes from the chords, and then we get this, it's like a dotted quarter note pattern, except everything's being played by eighth notes. We're using the MIDI to re-trigger the sound in a way. So yeah, you can see here, it kind of goes like dotted quarter down, and then after 4 measures, it does the inverse here. So it creates a really cool pattern, and the actual like way this plays is so cool. It sounds incredible in my opinion. Sounds so much better with the rest of the tracks as well. Like this part is really cool, and like I said, Kodiak told me to make a higher lead synth, and it was really hard because I didn't want to do any like hard style melodies or anything like that for this, but I came up with this and it works really well. So yeah, now we can go back to the bass because drums don't really have any notes. They just kind of play sounds that are atonal. They're just percussion. We look here in the intro, it's nothing too fancy. It's just like a dotted quarter and then a sustained note, and then same thing again. That's just the kind of for the intro to kind of build up. But the main pattern here, if you'll see, you got, it's like a quarter, then dotted quarter, then you have half, quarter, quarter. And that kind of pattern repeats. This allows for a really cool rhythmic feel because there's a lot of different kinds of notes. It's not just straight eighth notes the whole time or just dotted notes, which dotted notes are also cool. But I felt for this, it was a lot more groovy, kind of switching between like half and dotted quarter and quarter notes. So yeah, that's the thing about like jungle bass lines, which is kind of the inspiration for this bass line. There's a lot of jungle music. Shout out OTJ Bukum for that. But yeah. Yeah, thing to note about this is just like 2 or 3 notes, basically, for like just like little segment. You don't want too many notes because then it get too confusing. Everything is supposed to be about the groove. You don't have to worry about melodic or harmonic content with the bass line anyways. So yeah, but the bass line is supposed to complement the part it's in for the style of music, or at least for this song. I felt like that was the move. It's like the intro. It's like these 2 hits, you know, they kind of go like boom, boom, you know, just like, you know, kind of like huge sustained bass note. And then you have a very similar thing happening here following the acid sequence pattern. of course, the organ too is just copying the same thing that the bass is playing. So before we do that, let's get into the mastering. The mastering is probably a joke to some people because I'm not formally trained. We use a limiter to catch the peaks. We saturate across multiple bands and adjust the volume accordingly for each little band to get the sound we want. Use Valhalla Room with a very low mix, so that way the entire song sounds like it was recorded in the same room. I don't remember if I tempo matched the reverb settings to the BPM. I don't really know if that really matters, if I did or not, but I kind of wanted this to be more wide in terms of stereo width, so I felt reverb was the appropriate way to go about this for this specific track. We have TDR Nova. So with this, it's very much like just, cutting out the very high top end and the sub frequencies and getting rid of a little bit of 500 hertz. But I didn't really have to EQ too much because everything was EQ'd so much anyways. We have this compressor again, Goated compressor. It's free. Definitely try it out. We're only getting like maybe a decibel gain reduction, but we don't really need too much. This also adds a lot of color to the overall sound, which is the idea. That's why I like this compressor so much. It has a multi-band compression just to compress the mid-range a little bit more and have the high end and low end be a little bit less compressed. It's still getting compressed, obviously. But yeah, that's kind of the idea with this. Just glue everything in the middle together because the magic's in the mid-range. And we boosted the mid-range as well and cut off a little bit of the sub-frequencies. The EQ is not really too crazy here. This one is more of EQ for color or EQ for tone or whatever. Once again, not too many. Like the adjustments are really minute, really small adjustments, just to add a little bit more of what I like. Like I like the mid-range, so I boosted it. Yeah, same with the 6K hertz high mid-range, I boosted it a little bit, but you can see there's like no more than maybe 2 decibel gain reduction or gain being applied. And on the parts that I wanted to reduce the gain, it's like it is still not a lot being taken away. Like I took out like almost a decibel of 400 hertz, but not quite, and 1.5 decibels of 800 hertz. So you don't want to go too crazy with this if you're going to do this, but it's still nice to add. And you don't get a visualizer, so you have to do everything by ear, which is pretty fun. And we just have another limiter, just to make sure nothing's completely clipping through the master, so we don't get any gross distortion. So yeah, we can listen to this one more time. We can not one more time. We can listen to this from the beginning to the end. Now that we've examined it, so hopefully you have a better understanding of how this song, what makes this song kind of do the song thing. So yeah, that was the entire song, and I hope you learned something for your own productions from this. This song has a lot to unpack in it, and there's probably a lot of good little tricks in there for you. So hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video.